Every year at Memorial Day, for the past 64 years, I take a little trip in my mind and in my heart back to Korea, the land of the morning calm, to the year 1952. Most of that year I spent in Korea. It was an important year for me, and a lot of stories from it. Let me tell you one thing that happened. One morning in the summer, as I left the Quonset hut barracks that we stayed in to walk across the drill field to the office, the air was beginning to heat up and was thick with the acrid smell of the honey buckets, we called them, as they were cleaning out the sewage from our latrine, and they would use it later, of course, for fertilizing the crops. The Korean Military Advisory Group, KMAG, to which I was assigned, was housed in a 4-story brick building. I think it had been, before the war, probably a hospital. I was a chaplain's assistant assigned to Chaplain Major Foy Thomas. Slow-talking, easygoing, no-nonsense Texan. He was already at his desk when I got there, and he said, "Before you get settled, I've got a job for you to do." Okay. He said, "I'm supposed to go to Sakchori, up on the northeast, to do worship services this Sunday, but I just got a call from the POW camp at Kojito, and there's been some trouble down there, and they're calling in additional help from the chaplains. So I got to hightail it down there, and I want you to go to Sakcho and conduct the worship service for me." Well, now, to say I was surprised would be a massive understatement. I wasn't a chaplain. I wasn't even an officer. My job as a chaplain's assistant was to make sure that the chapel was cleaned and ready and set up for worship service. I did the church, the worship bulletin. I went out with the driver, I remember, on Thursday evenings to pick up Korean civilians and military who were part of our integrated chapel choir, which was a great experience. Gave me a chance to meet a lot of Koreans that I would not have met otherwise. I would go out as a guard for the driver to pick up the people for the choir on Thursday night and then again on Sunday morning. I did things like that. But hold the worship, preach, I was astounded. But before I could protest, Chaplain Thomas said, "Now I know it's not regulation, it's highly irregular, but hey, this is a war. And besides," he said, "I've already called the commanding officer up at Sakcho, and he says, well, if it's okay with me, it's okay with him." So, next morning, Saturday morning, I got my gear and I climbed aboard a little 2-seater plane. I think it was what we call the L-19, the Bird Dog, that the Army used. 2-seater, and Lieutenant Jenkins, the pilot, flew me up to Sakchori. We landed, a little landing strip, and I checked in at the commanding officer's tent. Told him that I was there and that I would be ready to do the services Sunday morning. He said, "Well, since you're acting as a chaplain, so to speak, And I thought about that acting chaplain. I had thought when Chaplain Thomas asked me to do this, maybe I could call myself Sergeant George M. Hale, acting chaplain. I decided not to push that. Anyhow, the CO said you'll eat with the officers at the officers' table, but you'll bunk with the enlisted men. It's okay with me. Saturday afternoon, and I could hear from where we were, I could hear the big guns going off. Sakchuri, the unit was established, actually it was north of the 38th parallel and about 15 miles from the demilitarized zone, the DMZ. The guns were just loud enough to make me realize where I was. Well, I had chow, bedded down for the night, and the next morning set up for worship in one end of the mess tent. Had about 10, 12 guys show up, and Chaplain Thomas had told me, he said, you won't be counseling or doing anything regular chaplain duties, of course, and but I'll give you a sermon that you can read as a part of the worship service. So I did. Things went pretty well, no problems. Lieutenant Jenkins was supposed to pick me up early afternoon, sometime in the afternoon. So after chow, I settled down to wait for him to come and take me back to Taegu. But when he started to land, when he came in, we had heard small arms fire going on, and we knew there was some guerrilla activity around. Just enough to make us know that they were there. But when he flew in and started to circle the land strip to land, they fired on him. Nobody hit him. He didn't have any trouble with that, but it was enough to make him climb to a higher altitude and to radio that he wasn't going to land. He said, I'll be back sometime tomorrow to pick you up. We'll give it another try. That's when the plan began to unravel, so to speak, and when I began to get nervous. Now, the unit that I was with at the moment was not in combat. There was a temporary halt, truce, so to speak, but nobody knew if it would hold, when it would come undone, anything. And I had the distinct feeling that it might be possible that I would be face to face with an enemy not too far in the future. I was a rifleman. I had a rifle. I was trained to fight, so to speak. But I would prefer to be back in Taegu. So I had somewhat of a dilemma. And Tony shared the same feeling. Now, Tony Olivetti, Staff Sergeant Tony Olivetti, was assigned to the Air Force, but he was on temporary duty at the unit at Sakcho. And his mission was pretty well completed. And Tony, when he realized what was happening with the guerrillas around the landing strip, said, Max, he said, I've got a Jeep. Why don't we hightail it and head for Seoul? Get out of here. That would mean about a 100-mile trip from Sakchuri, slightly southwest, to Seoul, all the way across the Korean Peninsula. But hey, I didn't have any better plans, so I said, shoot, let's do it. So we had breakfast Monday morning, and after chow, I threw my gear in the back of the Jeep, and we took off. Now, I didn't find out until we were actually en route, so to speak, that the Jeep that Tony had was not really his Jeep. He had borrowed it, is the term. We used to call it moonlight requisitioning. And so he didn't have any authorization for it. So here we were, traveling along fairly close to the 38th parallel with no authorization. Somehow we missed on the trip the military police checkpoints that were set up. I don't know why, but I don't remember being stopped at all. Then we approached Seoul. We come up on the top of a hill, and there's a lot of traffic going into Seoul, and I noticed that the MPs are checking everybody. Well, not quite everybody. It looks to me like they were hitting by every other vehicle. Pretty casual. I took a trip ticket out of the glove compartment, scribbled that we were authorized to travel from Sakchuri to Seoul, and then I scribbled Captain Hale at the bottom of it. And I knew that if anybody read it, we were in trouble, but I was hoping. And sure enough, as we passed the MP, I just simply held up the trip ticket. He glanced at it, motioned us on in. So, late afternoon, Monday afternoon, I'm no longer in Sakchuri. I'm safe, I'm in Seoul. Well, I'm not exactly home. Seoul, Taegu is another 150 miles south. Tony dropped me off at the beer garden and took off. I never saw Tony Olivetti after that. I often wonder what happened to him. But I shared a table at the beer garden with a Signal Corps captain and his sergeant. And while we were sitting there, I shared my dilemma. I'm in Seoul without orders, and I need to be in Taegu. Well, Captain Kennedy said, that's not a problem. He said, we'll take you down to the RTO, the train station. There's a military train that ran from Seoul to Taegu. And I'll give you a copy of my orders, and you can travel on my orders. I didn't know how that would work, but I didn't have anything to lose, and so sure enough, showed up at the RTO, and the captain approached the lieutenant who was in charge and told him he was going to, that he was supposed to go to Taegu, but he had another job to do, and I, as his sergeant, was going to go in his place. The lieutenant said, no, you can't do that. That's not legal. And the captain, I backed away at this point because I didn't want to get into the conversation. But I heard the captain say, hey, I do this all the time. He's got to take care of some business that I need to do, and I got to be someplace else. Well, I don't know everything that happened, but the bluff worked. I got on the train. 3 hours later, I was back in my Quonset hut in Taegu, safe and sound. Now, I should have warned you that this is not one of your usual war stories. In fact, I don't know how terribly important it is to anybody else. But I have to tell you, it's terribly important to me. And the main reason is that I'm alive to tell you about it.